The sky was quiet. For many years, Earth had been a peaceful planet, untouched by the chaos of intergalactic wars. People lived their everyday lives, oblivious to the fact that other worlds existed beyond their own. But that was before the invasion. One day, without warning, the skies were torn apart by the arrival of enormous ships. They moved through the clouds like shadows, silent but powerful. The people below looked up, confused and terrified. It was too late to run. In the chaos that followed, Earth's military scrambled to defend their land. But the invaders were unlike anything they had ever seen before. Their ships were sleek, their weapons advanced beyond imagination. And the creatures themselves, they looked almost human, but not quite. Their eyes were large, glowing with a faint blue light. Their skin had a strange tint, like it had never seen the sun. They spoke in a language that was unintelligible, but their actions were clear, hostile, and full of purpose. As the military tried to fight back, the invaders unleashed a weapon they had never seen. It was not a missile or a bomb, but something far more terrifying. It was a wave of energy, a pulse that struck the ground, shaking the earth and crumbling buildings to dust. People screamed, running for cover, but it was hopeless. The invaders had come with a singular purpose: take over, conquer, and erase any hope of resistance. Among the chaos, a young soldier named Ethan stood still, watching the destruction unfold before him. He had never seen such devastation. It felt like the end of the world. In the midst of the smoke and fire, Ethan saw something that caught his attention. A woman, unlike any he had ever seen before. She was crouched on the ground, her hands clutching the shoulders of a little girl. Her face was covered in dirt, but her eyes glowed faintly blue, filled with a sorrow that spoke volumes. The child beside her was no older than 5 or 6, her pale skin covered in grime, her eyes wide with fear. Ethan felt a strange pull, an inexplicable connection. Despite the invasion happening around him, he couldn't tear his gaze away from them. There was something haunting about the way the mother held the child. She was protective, desperate to shield the girl from the chaos surrounding them. The soldier's instincts kicked in. He had to help them, but how? He couldn't let his emotions cloud his judgment. But there was no time to think. As he slowly made his way toward them, Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The alien mother, sensing someone approaching, looked up. Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment, everything else around them seemed to disappear. Her expression was filled with both relief and fear. She knew that this was a moment that could change everything. And yet, she did not know who this human was, or whether he would be friend or foe. Ethan stopped a few feet away, his weapon still in hand. He didn't know what to say. He had never been trained for this kind of situation. But the sight of the child, her face so lost and helpless, stirred something deep inside him. He lowered his weapon slightly, trying to signal that he meant no harm. The woman spoke, her voice soft but filled with an alien cadence that was difficult to understand. She didn't speak much, only a few words that were almost lost in the noise of the battle. But the desperation in her tone was clear. She was begging for something: help, protection, or maybe just a chance to escape. Ethan tried to understand, but the fear in her eyes made it impossible to focus on anything but her plea for survival. Behind him, the sounds of the war grew louder. The ships were advancing, and the military was in full retreat. They couldn't hold the line much longer. But Ethan couldn't leave the woman and her daughter. He had to do something. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about compassion, about something deeper than the fight. Ethan turned toward the alien mother, his resolve growing stronger. "We can help you," he said in simple words, though he wasn't sure if she understood. "But you have to trust me." The alien mother didn't reply, but her gaze softened. She pulled the child closer to her, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to stop. The fighting continued, but in that brief moment, it felt as if time had slowed down. Ethan had made a choice. He wasn't sure how this would end, but he knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. And as the first light of hope flickered in the darkness, the alien mother slowly nodded. The sounds of distant explosions and the crackle of gunfire filled the air. But in that small, isolated moment, Ethan felt a strange peace. The alien mother and child, both looking to him for protection, seemed so vulnerable, so fragile in this new world of chaos. He knew the war wasn't over, not by a long shot, but something inside him told him that this wasn't just about survival anymore. There was something more to this encounter. Something he couldn't yet understand. Ethan glanced around, his mind racing. He was trained for battle, not for peace talks or comforting strangers. And these were no ordinary strangers. The alien mother's eyes burned into him, like she was trying to see deep into his soul, to understand his true intentions. Ethan didn't know if she saw kindness or simply another soldier to be distrusted. He couldn't be sure, but he couldn't leave them behind either. Not when they had no place to go. "Come on," Ethan finally said, his voice steady. He gestured for them to follow. The mother hesitated for only a second before she carefully stood up, the young girl still clutched in her arms. Ethan led them toward a nearby structure that had once been a military barricade. It was no longer safe for anyone, but it offered some cover from the ongoing attacks. As they moved, Ethan couldn't help but notice how different the aliens were from what he'd expected. They weren't just invaders, they were survivors too, struggling to make sense of the world that had invaded their own. Their faces were etched with pain and loss, but there was strength in their eyes, an inner resolve that told Ethan they had been through much worse than this. When they reached the shelter, Ethan found a small corner of the building that was relatively untouched by the destruction. It wasn't much, but it would have to do for now. He turned back to the mother and her child, who had sat down against the wall. The alien mother glanced at the surroundings, her expression unreadable. She seemed to be assessing the situation, taking in every detail, as if she was planning her next move. Ethan crouched down in front of them, trying to appear less threatening. "It's not much, but it's safer here for now. We can figure out what to do next." The alien mother's gaze shifted to him, and for a brief moment, she seemed to relax. There was something in her eyes, something vulnerable, yet hopeful. But the silence between them lingered, thick and uncomfortable. Ethan was the first to break it. You have no idea what's going on, do you?" he asked, his voice softer now. He wasn't sure if she understood the question, but it was a start. It felt better to speak than to stand there, staring at each other like strangers. The alien mother looked at him, her face still streaked with dirt and the grime of battle. She shook her head slowly. Ethan couldn't blame her. What was there to understand? The sudden arrival of alien forces, the destruction, the chaos, it was all too much to process in one sitting. And yet, here she was, sitting beside him, trusting him despite the war raging outside. Ethan couldn't fathom it. Stood up, scanning the area. The war wasn't waiting for them to figure things out. It was moving, relentless. The sound of alien ships continued to echo through the air, and the fires from the ruined cityscape painted the sky in shades of orange and red. Ethan could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Every second was critical. "We can't stay here long," he said, turning to face the mother again. "The fight's still out there, and we need to move before it comes for us." The alien mother nodded. She didn't seem afraid, just resolute. It was as if the fight was in her blood, just like it was in his. Her child clung to her, still too young to understand the true gravity of their situation, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. Ethan couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. This little girl had already lost so much: her world, her home, and her innocence. Ethan had an idea. If he was going to protect them, he had to understand more about who they were and why they were here. The answers wouldn't come easily, but he had to try. "I need to know your name," Ethan asked softly, hoping she could understand him. "And where you're from." For a moment, the alien mother didn't respond. She seemed to be thinking carefully, her eyes flicking to her daughter before returning to Ethan. Then, in broken but understandable English, she spoke. "My name is Lira," she said. Her voice was soft, almost melodic, but there was a sadness in it that made Ethan's heart ache. "And this is my daughter Isla. We come from a world far away, a place where the skies are not like yours. We did not come to destroy. We came to survive." The words hit Ethan hard. They weren't here to conquer, they were here to escape something far worse. But what could be worse than this? The thought echoed in his mind, but there were no easy answers. Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. We lost our home, our people, my people." She trailed off, her voice filled with emotion, but she quickly composed herself. "And now we have nowhere to go." Ethan nodded slowly, trying to process the enormity of what she had just shared. They were refugees, just like the civilians they had once been trained to protect. "I'll help you," he said quietly, but with conviction. "I don't know how, but I'll help you." Lyra's expression softened, and a flicker of gratitude crossed her face. For the first time since they had met, Ethan saw a hint of hope in her eyes, but the war was still out there. The fight wasn't over yet. And Ethan knew that whatever happened next, the stakes had just been raised higher than he could have ever imagined. Asterisk. The air was heavy with the scent of smoke and burning debris. As Ethan, Lira, and Isla crouched in the makeshift shelter, the distant rumble of artillery fire echoed through the fractured city, the sounds of battle growing closer with each passing minute. They had no time to waste, but every instinct in Ethan screamed at him to stay put, to keep them safe for just a little longer. But he knew that wasn't an option. Lira, the alien mother, had fallen silent after their brief exchange. She stared down at Isla, who clung to her tightly, her small form trembling with fear. It was clear that the little girl didn't fully understand the magnitude of the situation, but she knew enough to feel the weight of the world pressing down on her. She looked up at her mother, her blue eyes wide with an innocence that made Ethan's heart ache. "We can't stay here," Ethan said softly, breaking the silence that had settled between them. His voice was firm, but there was a hint of uncertainty, a fear that gnawed at him. He had no idea how to lead them, how to get them to safety. He was a soldier, trained for battle, not for this. But something about this moment felt different. Protecting Lira and Isla wasn't just a mission. It was personal now. Lira didn't respond right away. Instead, she lifted her head, her glowing blue eyes scanning the surroundings with sharp intensity. There was no doubt in Ethan's mind that she was weighing the risks, calculating the next move. She was no stranger to survival, and the war that had brought her here seemed to have shaped her into someone far more resilient than he could ever have imagined. Finally she spoke. Her voice was low, but there was a fire behind it, a quiet determination that matched his own. "Where do we go?" she asked, the question heavy with meaning. Ethan thought for a moment, his mind racing. They had to get out of the open before they were spotted. The military forces wouldn't spare them, not when they saw an alien mother and her child. And the invaders, whoever they were, would have no mercy either. They had already shown their brutality in full force. "There's an old underground bunker not far from here," he said, scanning the horizon. "It's off the radar, hidden from both the military and the enemy. It's our best chance." Lira nodded without hesitation, though Ethan could see the wariness in her eyes. The underground bunker was a dangerous place to go, filled with remnants of old wars and unused technology. But it was safer than staying exposed in the open. "We go," Lira said simply, her voice unwavering. She rose to her feet carefully, cradling Isla in her arms. Ethan followed suit, standing tall, his rifle slung across his back. Every movement felt calculated, every step a decision that could mean life or death. The world outside was still chaotic, the remnants of their once thriving city now reduced to rubble. Buildings had crumbled into ruins, streets that were once filled with life now empty and haunting. The invasion had torn the fabric of society apart. It was hard for Ethan to imagine that just days ago, this city had been full of people going about their lives, completely unaware of what was coming. The group moved through the wreckage, keeping low and avoiding any unnecessary attention. Ethan's eyes darted from side to side, always alert, always listening for any sign of movement. The alien ships were still hovering in the distance, their ominous shapes like dark clouds in the sky. Every now and then, he would catch a glimpse of the enemy forces on the ground, patrolling the area, looking for survivors. It didn't take long for them to reach the outskirts of the city, where the remains of an old train station lay abandoned. From there, it was a short walk to the entrance of the bunker. But as they neared the station, Ethan's instincts flared. He stopped, holding up a hand to signal for Lira and Isla to halt. There was something off about the air, something that didn't sit right. "What is it?" Lira whispered, her gaze flickering nervously as she looked around. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he scanned the area. The station seemed too quiet, too still. "Stay low," he muttered. "We're not alone." Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from the shadows. Ethan's heart raced as he crouched, pulling Lira and Isla down with him. The footsteps grew louder, and he could hear the clanking of metal boots on the ground. The enemy soldiers were getting closer. Ethan motioned for Lira to stay back as he slowly crept forward, trying to get a better look. His heart pounded in his chest, and his mind raced. He couldn't afford to be spotted. The slightest mistake could lead to everything falling apart. Peering around the corner, Ethan saw a group of enemy soldiers moving through the station, their weapons at the ready. They were scanning the area, searching for any signs of life. Ethan's stomach sank. He could tell they were getting closer to their position. He turned back to Lira, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to move now." Lira's eyes were filled with fear, but she nodded, understanding the urgency of the situation. She moved quietly, clutching Isla close to her, her every step deliberate. Ethan kept a careful watch on the soldiers, his eyes never leaving them as he guided the alien mother and child toward the bunker. The tension in the air was palpable. Every footstep seemed to echo too loudly, every sound amplified by the silence that surrounded them. Ethan could feel the weight of their situation pressing down on him. It felt like the entire world was closing in around them, and they had nowhere to go but forward. As they reached the entrance to the bunker, Ethan quickly motioned for Lira and Isla to follow him inside. He shoved the heavy metal door open, and they hurried inside, the darkness of the bunker swallowing them whole. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of rust and decay lingered in the air. But it was safe for now. The door slammed shut behind them, sealing out the chaos of the outside world. They were alive. For now, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Whatever lay ahead, it would be harder than anything they had faced so far. And in this strange, new world, there was no guarantee that anyone would survive, but they would fight together. The air inside the bunker was damp and thick with the scent of old machinery, a far cry from the acrid stench of burning city that had followed them. The door clanged shut behind them with an eerie finality, sealing them in the dark. Ethan's eyes slowly adjusted to the dim light filtering in through cracked vents and old electrical panels, revealing the rusted remnants of a forgotten underground facility. This was a relic of past conflicts, long abandoned and left to gather dust. Yet now it was their only chance. Ethan turned to check on Lira and Isla, who had followed him into the bunker. Lira's expression was calm, but heavy with the burden of her experiences. She held Isla close, the little girl's small form pressed against her chest as she trembled in silence. Isla was too young to fully understand the enormity of the situation, but the fear in her eyes was undeniable. It was clear she had already seen too much of the brutality of this war. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, his voice softer now, trying to offer a sense of reassurance. He wasn't sure how much of what he said would make any difference, but it felt necessary to break the silence. Lira nodded, her tired eyes meeting his. "We are safe for now, but we cannot stay here long." Ethan understood. They needed to plan something more than simply hiding in the dark corners of an abandoned bunker. But for the moment, there was nothing more they could do. The world above was still tearing itself apart. The alien ship still hovered ominously in the sky, and the soldiers of Earth continued their retreat. He knew the war would eventually reach this underground sanctuary. It was only a matter of time. "We need to find a way to communicate with your people," Ethan said after a long pause, trying to think through their next steps. "Maybe there's something in here that could help. Some technology, some way to make contact." Lira didn't respond right away. Her eyes lingered on the rusted equipment around them, her brow furrowed in thought. She knew more about technology than she let on. Ethan could see the wheels turning in her mind as she considered his suggestion. "Perhaps," she said, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "But we need access to systems that were long forgotten. Our people. They may have left something behind, but it's not easy to find." The bunker had once been a place of strategic importance during an older war. Long before the aliens had arrived on Earth, technology from a time past, built to withstand invasion and chaos, now lay dormant and decaying beneath the surface. Ethan wasn't sure what kind of systems Lira was referring to, but he trusted her instincts. If anyone could navigate this decaying labyrinth of machines, it was her. "Let's look," Ethan said, taking the lead once again. He moved cautiously through the narrow hallways, Lira following closely behind. The walls were lined with old, malfunctioning screens, and there was the occasional hum of a forgotten engine, its power still flickering in some corner of the facility. Isla, still clinging to her mother, looked up at the dark, abandoned space with wide eyes. She didn't make a sound, but Ethan could feel her fear radiating off her. This was a world so different from the one she had known. A world full of danger, destruction, and uncertainty. He couldn't imagine what it must be like for her as they reached what appeared to be the central command room. Lira motioned to a console at the far end of the room. "This," she said, "might be what we need." Ethan approached cautiously, his fingers grazing the surface of the control panel. The screens were dark, flickering sporadically as if fighting to stay alive. He pressed a few buttons, but nothing responded. He cursed softly, feeling the weight of the situation. "Anything?" he asked, turning to Lira. "Give me a moment," Lira replied, stepping forward. Her fingers danced across the console with ease, almost as if she knew exactly how to operate the system. Ethan watched her, intrigued. The alien woman was clearly well versed in technology, and it was clear she wasn't just a mother trying to survive. She was a fighter, and more importantly, she had knowledge that could be their key to surviving this war. Lira worked quickly, her eyes darting from one screen to another, adjusting settings with a precision that Ethan found impressive. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, one of the screens flickered to life. A map appeared on the screen, detailing various locations across the planet. Some marked with red alerts, others green, indicating safe zones or areas with potential resources. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he scanned the map. It was a map of Earth, but not like any he had seen before. It seemed more advanced, almost like it had been updated with alien technology. "This," Lira murmured, her voice filled with a mix of relief and disbelief. "This is the location of the command center where our fleet is waiting. But it is far from here, and I don't know if we can make it in time." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment they had been hoping for. If they could reach this command center, maybe they could finally turn the tide of the war. But the journey would be perilous, filled with enemies, both alien and human, and time was running out. "I don't care how far it is," Ethan said, his voice resolute. "We'll get there. Together." Lira looked at him, her gaze steady, calculating. Then, for the first time since they had met, she allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give Ethan hope. In this dark world full of destruction, they had found something worth fighting for. But before they could make any further plans, the ground beneath them suddenly shook. The sound of distant explosions echoed from above. Ethan's pulse quickened as he realized what was happening. "They've found us," Lira said, her voice tense. "We need to move, now." Ethan's heart raced as he grabbed his rifle and motioned for Lira and Isla to follow him. They had no time to waste. The war was closing in on them, and they had no choice but to fight for their survival. As they rushed through the dark corridors of the bunker, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the war was only just beginning. And this time, the stakes were higher than ever. Whatever came next, it would test them all in ways they could never have imagined. The bunker trembled once more as another wave of explosions rumbled from above. The distant sounds of warfare grew louder, and the ground beneath them seemed to shift with each passing second. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to move faster. There was no time to think, no time to plan. They had to leave, and they had to leave now. He turned to Lira, who was still clutching Isla tightly to her chest, her face set in determination. The mother's eyes, once filled with sorrow, now gleamed with the resolve of someone who had seen too much and was ready to fight for what little remained. "We need to go," Ethan said, his voice urgent. Lira nodded without hesitation, her grip on Isla tightening as they began to move swiftly through the corridors. The narrow hallways felt like a maze, the dim light from flickering overhead panels casting long shadows across the walls. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the emptiness, amplifying the eerie silence that surrounded them. As they reached the bunker's exit, Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The thick metal doors that had once sealed them inside now stood as the last barrier between them and the war raging outside. He placed a hand on the cold, rusted surface, the weight of what lay beyond the door pressing heavily on him. "Ready?" he asked, looking back at Lira. Lira's eyes met his. She didn't need to say a word. Her expression said it all. She was ready, even if the odds were stacked against them. With a deep breath, Ethan pushed the door open. The harsh daylight hit him like a wave, momentarily blinding him as he stepped outside. The destruction that lay before them was a haunting sight. The city, once alive with the hustle of everyday life, now lay in ruins, its skeleton of buildings standing as a grim reminder of the invasion that had ravaged the planet. The alien ships hovered menacingly in the sky, their sleek forms dark against the orange-tinted clouds. There was no sign of the military anymore, no human forces to fight back, only the enemy's relentless advance. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and decay, and the sky above was a dull, oppressive gray. Ethan didn't waste a second. "This way," he ordered, motioning for Lira to follow. They had no map, no clear path, just a single destination, the command center. But the journey was far from safe. As they moved through the wreckage of the city, every corner seemed to hold a new danger. Enemy soldiers patrolled the streets, their armored figures moving swiftly in search of survivors. Ethan kept them low, guiding Lira and Isla through alleys and behind collapsed buildings. Every step felt like a tightrope walk. The enemy could be anywhere. After what felt like hours, they came across a broken street filled with the remnants of a military convoy. Tanks and trucks lay abandoned, some still burning, others overturned. Ethan's eyes scanned the scene, assessing the situation. There were no soldiers in sight, But he knew it was only a matter of time before reinforcements arrived. Lira's voice broke the silence. "They're getting closer." Ethan nodded grimly. They couldn't afford to stay here for long. They had to keep moving. "We need to cross that street," Ethan said, pointing to the other side where a small alleyway offered a possible escape. "Stay low, move quickly." Lira and Isla followed closely behind him, their footsteps silent as they made their way toward the edge of the destroyed convoy. But just as they reached the halfway point, a sudden noise made Ethan's heart race. A loud crunching sound echoed from the street behind them. Ethan spun around, just in time to see a group of enemy soldiers. Rounding the corner, their weapons drawn and ready. "Run!" Ethan shouted. In an instant, the world erupted into chaos. The enemy soldiers fired their weapons, the sharp crack of gunfire splitting the air. Ethan grabbed Lira's arm, pulling her and Isla into a nearby building for cover. Bullets ricocheted off the walls as they ducked behind a broken concrete pillar. "Stay down," Ethan ordered, his voice tight with urgency. The enemy soldiers moved closer, their boots pounding the ground as they advanced, their eyes scanning the area for any signs of movement. Lira pressed Isla close to her chest, her face a mask of calm, but Ethan could see the fear in her eyes. She didn't want to lose her child, not here, not now. Ethan's mind raced. He needed a way out. They couldn't stay here, not with the soldiers closing in. He glanced around the building. It was a ruin, but the structure was still mostly intact. There was a set of stairs leading up to the roof. "Upstairs," he whispered, pointing to the staircase. "We need to get to the roof." Lira nodded, her expression unwavering. She didn't ask questions. She simply followed his lead, taking Isla's hand and moving quickly up the stairs. Ethan followed behind them, his weapon at the ready, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. When they reached the rooftop, the view was both beautiful and horrifying. The city sprawled out beneath them, a landscape of devastation. The alien ships loomed overhead, and in the distance, the sounds of combat raged on, but they were safe at least for now. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. They had made it to the roof, but their journey was far from over. The command center was still miles away, and the enemy was closing in on them faster than he had anticipated. "We need to keep moving," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "We can't stop." Lira looked at him, her gaze steady. "You're right, but where will we go now?" Ethan glanced toward the horizon. The map had shown a safe zone, a place where they could find shelter, but it was still far out of reach. And the closer they got to the command center, the more dangerous it would become. The alien forces would be waiting for them, but Ethan couldn't afford to think about that now. He had to focus on what was in front of him. "We'll find a way," he said, his voice filled with determination. "We'll keep moving, together." And with that, they prepared to face whatever came next. The fight for survival was far from over, but they had something that could not be taken from them: hope. And as long as they had that, they would never give up. The wind howled around the rooftop as Ethan, Lira, and Isla watched the horizon stretch out before them. The city below nothing more than a fractured memory of what it had once been. The alien ships hovered in the distance, their dark shapes cutting through the gray sky like specters. The world had changed irrevocably, and there was no going back. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. They had made it this far, but the road ahead was still treacherous. The alien forces were relentless, and the military, what was left of it, was in full retreat. His mind raced as he tried to map out their next steps. The command center was still their only hope. It held the answers they needed to turn the tide of the war, but they were running out of time. "We need to move," Ethan said, his voice a mixture of urgency and determination. He turned to Lira, his gaze meeting hers. "Can you keep up?" Lira nodded, the glow in her eyes never wavering. She had been through hell, and yet, She was still standing, still fighting for her daughter. It was the one thing that had kept her going through everything, the hope that there was a chance for a future. For Isla, for both of them. "We'll keep moving," she replied, her voice steady. They had already lost so much, her people, her home, her future. Ethan couldn't help but wonder if they were chasing a dream, or if they were simply running from the inevitable. But he couldn't allow himself to dwell on doubt. Not now. He had made a promise to protect them, and that's what he would do. The journey to the command center was long, and every step forward felt like an eternity. The path was dangerous, littered with the wreckage of fallen soldiers, broken vehicles, and abandoned supplies. Every corner seemed to hold new threats, enemy patrols, lurking dangers, and the constant reminder that the world they knew was gone. The streets they walked on were now full of ghosts, and every shadow held the possibility of death. But through it all, Lira never wavered. She was a warrior in her own right, a survivor. She moved through the ruins with a grace that came from years of hardship, always staying one step ahead, always looking out for Isla and for Ethan. As the sun began to set, casting the world in a blood-red glow, they reached a clearing just outside the command center's location. The area was eerily quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Ethan could feel the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on him. This was it. They were close. But he knew that getting into the command center wouldn't be easy. It was heavily guarded by both human and alien forces, and every minute they spent waiting made it more likely they would be discovered. "We can't stay here," Ethan said, his voice tight with the urgency of the moment. "We need to get inside before they see us." Lira nodded, her face a mask of calm, though Ethan could see the flicker of fear in her eyes. Isla, for her part, had grown quiet. She was tired, too tired, and the weight of everything had begun to take its toll on her. But Lira held her close, as if she could shield her from the horrors of the world around them. They moved quickly, keeping to the shadows, using every bit of cover they could find. The command center was within sight now, a massive complex of steel and concrete, its high walls lined with guards. The ground around it was littered with remnants of old battles, and the air was thick with tension. Ethan's breath came in short, controlled gasps as he led them toward a side entrance, one he had memorized from the maps Lira had uncovered. But as they neared the entrance, the faint sound of footsteps reached his ears. He froze. Someone was coming. Ethan motioned for them to stay still, his body pressed against the cold concrete wall. Lira and Isla held their breath, waiting for the danger to pass. The enemy soldiers' voices were low, but they were close. Too close, Ethan's mind raced. They couldn't afford to get caught. Not now. Not when they were so close to salvation. When the soldiers passed, Ethan motioned for Lira to move. They crept forward, their every step calculated, their bodies moving. As one, it felt like time had slowed. Every second was stretched out, every footstep an eternity. They reached the entrance and slipped inside. The air inside the command center was cool, sterile, and silent. Ethan's eyes darted from one hallway to another as he led them deeper into the complex. There was no turning back now. They had made it this far, and they weren't going to stop until they had what they needed. After what felt like hours of navigating dark corridors, they finally reached the main control room. Inside, the hum of alien technology filled the air, and strange symbols flickered across the walls. It was a mix of alien and human technology, blending together in a way that was both beautiful and terrifying. Ethan's eyes widened as he took in the sight. This was it, the heart of the enemy's operations. Lira moved quickly to the central console, her fingers flying over the controls. She muttered something in her language, her voice low but filled with purpose. Ethan kept watch, his heart pounding in his chest. The lights flickered, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to hold its breath. Then, the screens lit up, displaying a map of the world, But this time, it was different. This wasn't a map of Earth. It was a map of their world, Lira's people's world. The command center was connected to her home planet, and the coordinates were clear. This was the key to ending the war, the key to bringing her people home. Ethan could see the glint of hope in Lira's eyes, a spark of something long forgotten. She had found it, their way home. But just as the realization settled in, the ground beneath them trembled once again. The enemy had found them. Time to move, Ethan said, his voice sharp. Lira hesitated for a moment, her fingers lingering over the console. She had a choice: stay and try to complete the mission, or leave with Ethan and Isla, ensuring their survival. She looked at Isla, her child, then at Ethan. And in that moment, she made her choice. "We leave," she said, voice resolute. "My people can wait. Isla. She comes first." Together, they ran, through the halls, past the enemies, and into the night. The journey had been long, the battle fierce, but in the end, it wasn't just about survival. It was about love, the kind that could withstand even the darkest of times. And as they ran, Ethan knew one thing for certain. They had fought not only for survival but for the chance to build something better, a new future, a future where the light could shine again.